How'd everybody do last night? Yeah, decent, semi-decent? Okay dinner? Did you make a new friend? Did you just go back to your hotel room and lie down? Anybody go out and get some fresh air? A little bit of both. Go out and get some fresh air. Really amazing conversations yesterday. Obviously, Mother Nature decides to exert her influence every once in a while. We've got weather moving in. We lost a couple people this morning because they're worried about the 10 inches of snow that's going to fall in Colorado's high country, which I actually love. It's that time of the year, gang. I've got my Thanksgiving socks on, too. But we've got a lot to talk about today, a lot of really exciting stuff to talk about today. But before we get going on today, I think it's important to reflect back on what happened yesterday to sort of encapsulate where we've been and where we want to go. So before I bring our first guest up on stage to help me talk through that, how have people enjoyed being at the Spur? Have you liked the facility? Is it kind of cool? Slow golf clap. It's pretty fun, right? Have you walked around to some of the other buildings and checked them out? I mean, it seems like a shining beacon on a hill. It's really impressive to see the vision and the thought that went into this space. And so I want to introduce you to the person whose house we are actually in. Jocelyn Hittle is the Associate Vice Chancellor for this campus and is also on the Salazar Center's Advisory Board. And she's led the strategic development of this campus among a host of other things that she coordinates. And she actually also hosts the annual Water in the West Conference, slated to happen right here in just a month. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming up Associate Vice Chancellor Hittle.
Okay.
We can dance. Do you want to go over there?
Here we go.
Okay. To your left, to your right. You know, this thing, oh, wait, it went away, but that's okay. Did everybody check the live? That was amazing. Wasn't that incredible? I sent the picture to Jeannie Renee Malone of her, and I don't think she's ever been captured like that. So whoever drew her yesterday, she appreciates the youth and vigor you put into her hair. So, you know, it'd be kind of an open-ended question to say, how do you think yesterday went, especially from your chair, seeing all of the global meetings that come through this space, all of the gatherings that you are deeply involved in. What were some top things that stood out to you yesterday?
Yeah, thanks, and good morning, everybody. I'm glad to hear that you all are enjoying the Spur campus. It would have been really awkward for me if the answer to that question was not a yes. So thank you for starting the morning off right. So thanks for the question. A couple things that really stood out for me, and I'll just note before I dive in on a couple of observations that while I have spent what has now been almost a decade working on bringing the Spur campus out of the ground, what's really special about it is the work that happens within it. So conversations like this are really what it's all about, and what I had my eye on from the beginning is what is it we're going to do in these buildings. My background is actually in ecology and environmental management, so these conversations and the fact that we're hosting them here is really important to me personally. So a couple things I noticed yesterday, if I may, and I want to hear what you observed also, is there were some threads that I think wove throughout a lot of the conversation. One was this idea of incrementality, that it's part of all of our climate solutions. It's part of reconciliation as we're thinking about ethical space and the connections between different ways of thinking. And I think that is helpful to keep in mind, as sometimes the conversation can feel a bit overwhelming when we're talking about something as big as climate or as big as reconciling ways of thinking. The other thing I heard that I think was hopeful is that there are dollars available, that we're maybe at a time that has some unprecedented amount of investment that is coming from local, federal, state, and private sector sources that are being pointed toward the challenges that we're all interested in addressing. But what I also heard is that there's a bit of a mismatch between a mismatch between scale, geographic scale, and also a mismatch in timing. So, we heard people talking about, and you all know how resilient nature is and how powerful it can be in in helping to solve climate problems or other environmental problems. It's incredibly resilient, even if resilience might be a little hard to understand, as I heard Tiffany point out. But you can't do climate work without nature. We heard Lauren say that, I think. And we saw in the Roots So Deep clips the power of nature in its resilience and what happens when you change, when you sort of shift back toward what nature is used to doing, and all of the power that it has to revert back to its more balanced, productive, and carbon sequestering state. So I think that piece really struck me, is this resilience piece is important, but the urgency and effectiveness of these solutions in some places make you want to scale it quickly, and that doesn't always work. So again, we get at the incremental piece, right? If you have something that works somewhere, it doesn't work everywhere. You can't roll the picnic blanket out, right? So there's this mismatch in scale, and also a timing mismatch. So, I think Lauren mentioned that, no one wants to, funders don't typically want to wait for monitoring. They would like to see faster returns on investment. We heard that again when Tanya and Angela were talking about their work. The projects are never done. There's this really long time scale that is hard. So there's a timing mismatch. I think Peter was pretty frank also about investors wanting ROI that's much faster than nature-based solutions can do. So, you're talking about a timing mismatch too. You might have near-term carbon loss for long-term gain, right? All of these things are examples of how the timing mismatch really weaves throughout. That change moves at the speed of trust quote that we also heard a couple of times. So I think that's one of the things I really heard is we have scale mismatch, we have timing mismatch, and how do we kind of bring those things together is one of the threads, a couple of the threads that I heard throughout the day yesterday.
Yeah, it's there's so many points of connection, and hopefully y'all were thinking about this as well yesterday. One of the biggest things that stood out to me was I had a count, and I don't have the paper with me, but it was well into the teens of people on stage mentioning the next generation. The next generation we're hearing, we're reading about, we're considering. The next generation is thinking and feeling these things. And I remember looking up in the audience at one point to some of Shoshana's emerging leaders, and I saw them look at each. I think they're talking about us. So we have. How many people were at the luncheon yesterday? How many of you next geners are actually still in the room? Bravo! Thanks for getting up early. The aha moment for me is, how about we bring y'all up on stage next year and have you tell us what we're missing, because that bridge and that divide, I think there's a unique opportunity there to try to share some of that continuity and to hear different voices and the next generation of voices. So that was an aha for me and a moment. Before I get too deep into some of my other thoughts, I want to get all of you thinking in this way. So if we could put the Slido up, please. This is where you use technology, gang. If you don't know how, make a friend, find one of those next-gen leaders to show you how it all works. We're going to do a poll really quick this morning, and we want to hear from you. The simple polling question: what was your favorite idea or insight that you heard yesterday? And the magic mystery machine in the interwebs will collate and consolidate all of the things you bring forward into this survey into a word cloud, and then we'll talk a little bit about that as it populates on the screen. So something else that stood out to me, Jocelyn, was I really appreciated the conversation from Tiffany yesterday. I really liked hearing from TRCP. It's often a segment of our industry, meaning the outdoor recreation industry, that doesn't get a lot of daylight and doesn't get a lot of conversation. And I think as we move into conservation and stewardship and some of these larger questions of not only the efforts within science to address some of these questions, but the products that leverage our natural resources. It was a really unique perspective coming from her. I did a little digging last night, as I love to do, about some of the legislation that helped bring some of those taxes for some of that gear forward way back when. And now, I don't know, I can't see Tiffany through the lights if she's here this morning. Now, they consider themselves visionary, a part of the industry that's really brought the work forward. Back then, it was a fight, gang. It was a fight. People didn't want to do it. Consumers definitely didn't want to do it. There was concern that brands would get killed because of this request. But now, funnily enough, it's seen as something that was absolutely necessary, something they're deeply proud of. And so my challenge to myself and to all of us in the room is, what's that moonshot moment that's going to make people uncomfortable, frankly? That's going to have people push back a little bit and think, oh, this doesn't make me very comfortable to talk about, because in my mind's eye, that's the thing that we should be focusing on, not the light and fluffy. So look at that, already coming in a big way. And ethical space right now remains in the center. Anything else stand out to you as this pops up?
I think one of the things that was really on my mind as well, as I was listening to the different, I just want to say first, before I continue, that the Salazar team has put together an amazing couple of days, and yesterday was really incredible. And it was, and there's this diversity of perspectives, right? We're talking about the private sector. We're talking about restoration and blue carbon, which I see is another piece that was a big take home for you all. We're talking about ethical space. It's such a rich conversation that I think one of the things to just expand on what you're saying, Luis, around what's the moment that makes people uncomfortable? What's the next step that pushes us beyond where we are right now? There are a lot of the conversations that we heard yesterday. Some of the things that were brought up aren't new, right? These have been challenges for a long time. Many of you have been working in this space for a long time, and don't want to have the same conversation again next year, right? You want to see progress and to be sharing progress. So I think it's really interesting for us to think about what is the step that everyone can take that is a bit uncomfortable. It won't be uncomfortable in 5 years, to your point. So I think there's a role to play in the, to go back to my previous points about mismatch, if you think about the space in between, that's where a lot of you operate, and that's where there is a lot of discomfort, where you're trying to ratchet down from a larger scale to a smaller scale, or ratchet up from small scale to large scale. That space is uncomfortable.
I see people are leveraging this tool to be rabble rousers. I like it. I like the discomfort. There's a lot of stuff coming up here that which shall not be named, people are actually putting on the screen, like backpack tax and bike tax, and stacked priorities, stacked finance. I think that these are things that for a long time have been somewhat taboo, but reflecting off of the speed of trust, I think we're getting to this place of the trust is there. We're all starting to work together. I just had a conversation with someone in the room this morning that leads an NGO, and for the first time ever, there's conversations about how NGOs who fight for similar funding, but in their own unique ways, are finally starting to come together at the same table to point in the same direction, even though they know full well that may split, 5 cents that each one of them could get into 2.5, and that's going to be okay because they're building a larger voice and a larger coalition to drive this work forward. So that's something I've also never heard before.
I like that urgency is in all caps. That's very meta.
That's good. That's really good. And blue carbon, bravo. Obviously, your presentation yesterday had immense merit. And when I think of some of those larger strategies that we've never heard about, clearly some people think that that's important because it's very big. So that's really good. When we start to say, with respect to some of these things in kinship, I think that's reflective of what I was just speaking to, is that, there is this sense, we've all been in it together for a very, very long time, but I think for the first time we're starting to see ourselves as kin, not as, well, you do your thing, I'll do my thing. We're related, but we don't actually sit at the same table. We're recognizing that larger table needs to be a part of it. Cows, very important. cows are deeply important to the process.
That's someone who's pandering to us as the land grants. Yeah.
So as we wrap up, is there anything else that really stands out to you? I think, everybody out there, if you want to take a picture of this before we pull it down, it's obviously in the recording to help you keep thinking about yesterday and being reflective on today. Is there anything else that stands out to you?
I guess I would just say, I think the visual that I had in my mind yesterday as I was thinking about this, again, I keep going back to the scale mismatch, but the vision I had, the sort of visual I had is nature as this really powerful tool, and the nature-based solutions thread that was woven through everyone's remarks. Nature is this really big gear that moves a lot when it turns, that has a lot of impact when it turns, but it turns more slowly. And then there are all of these other projects and programs, whether it's at a smaller scale or at a faster pace, that are these smaller gears over here. And how can we as a group who cares about these things be the gears that are in between, that are helping those small gears to turn the large one, or vice versa. And so I think that's just the visual that really is going to stick with me from the symposium, is that uncomfortable space, that translational space, that connecting space, that actually helps us to make really good progress.
That's great. And for me, I don't know about any of you, but before I go to bed, I'll admit it. I get on social media, I scroll, I swipe, I look, I see what happened in my sphere and spheres connected to me, that world. And as I checked out the CSU Salazar Center's feed from yesterday, it's clear that Greg and Kate want all the hammocks. They took pictures literally everywhere. They hashtagged all over the place. Greg and Kate, if you're out there, you're winning right now. Stay strong. Apparently nobody else wants a hammock. Deeply impressed by your Instagram game last night. Let's see if anybody challenges them today.
It's all about commitment. You have to work hard. Yeah.
Bravo.
And thanks for using that as an opportunity to explore the rest of the campus. I hope you all do take some time to check out the rest of Spur. You heard a little bit from President Parsons yesterday about some of the features of the buildings, but I'll just note that you're in the hydro building. We have a one water approach here, so we have stormwater best practices and various other things you can explore. Sustainability is really woven throughout how the buildings are built. But again, what's really important over the lifetime of this project is the conversations that happen within the building. So thank you all for being here and for contributing all your expertise.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Associate Vice Chancellor Hittle for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, we ready to get going? So how many folks heard about that little pesky thing last week called government shutdown pending? Anybody hear about that last week? So we had all these fantastic ideas before that dialogue started, and the continuing resolution came forward, and all the folks that were supposed to be here in person that had to struggle with that invite, as anyone working in the federal government did, were still committed to making sure that their voice and their perspective on what we're talking about here over the past 2 days was heard. So I just want to introduce who we're going to hear from next on the screen, who is Chairwoman Brenda Mallory. Chairwoman Mallory is the 12th chair of the White House Council on Environmental Quality, and as chair, she advises the president on environmental and natural resources policies that improve, preserve, and protect public health and the environment for all of our communities. She has done an exceptional job navigating the wilderness in this space and was deeply committed to making sure we heard our comments. So do we have her video queued up?
Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be invited back to speak at the Salazar Center Symposium, even though I am not able to be in Denver with you all. The group of thinkers, researchers, and doers at this symposium are important partners as our administration moves ahead on our ambitious conservation agenda, which centers on how we can work with nature to stem the climate and biodiversity crises. As I looked back at my speech here in 2021, it was exciting to see the accomplishments that the Biden-Harris administration has achieved since then. But we're not out of the woods yet. Across the globe, we are collectively witnessing the devastating impacts of climate change on communities, habitats, and wildlife. We also are rapidly seeing the impacts of nature loss on the health of our communities and the economy. Climate change accelerates the biodiversity crisis, which in turn accelerates the climate change crisis. For example, when we lose a species of tree, we lose the tree's ability to capture carbon. And when entire forests are destroyed, we risk that land becoming a carbon production liability rather than a carbon reduction asset. President Biden has prioritized conserving and restoring nature and sees conservation as a key part of his climate legacy. We all know that if we can address climate change, we protect biodiversity. The two are linked. Our policies recognize that the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis are interlinked. We know that the success of our work in biodiversity conservation can assist in the climate fight and vice versa. Although the climate crisis poses a catastrophic risk to nature, nature can help us adapt to and mitigate the effects of that same crisis. Today, I want to highlight 3 key parts of our work that are helping reach our climate and biodiversity targets. Number 1, inspiring and investing in nature and nature-based solutions. 2, promoting equity and environmental justice. And 3, delivering on collaborative conservation. First, through our nature-based solutions roadmap, we are inspiring federal efforts to deploy natural solutions to the climate and biodiversity crises, like using plants, trees, reefs, and wetlands to cool down overheated waters, absorb carbon, and buffer the impacts of extreme weather and climate change. We can do this while building a nature-skilled workforce and scaling nature-based climate and biodiversity solutions on public and private lands across the nation. Although climate change and the biodiversity crisis pose catastrophic risk to nature, investing in nature is a key part of the solution. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act invest billions in conservation and nature-based solutions to address the impacts of climate change, stem nature loss, improve infrastructure, and create a just future. And we're moving forward aggressively to advance those solutions. All of our administration's work centers on equity and justice, and conservation is no different. In this space, we are prioritizing environmental justice by investing in communities that lack green and blue spaces, known as nature-deprived communities. This means that not only are we addressing the climate and biodiversity crises, but we're building healthier communities along the way. The President's Justice 40 initiative sets a goal that 40% of the overall benefits of climate and clean energy investments flow to disadvantaged communities that are marginalized by underinvestment and overburdened by pollution. Through Justice 40, we are embedding environmental justice in the federal DNA and directing hundreds of billions of dollars from the President's Investing in America agenda to where they are needed most. This includes expanding access to the outdoors. Bike paths and trails, safe routes to schools, parks, and other outdoor areas can promote health and well-being, including increasing physical activity and reducing stress. But more than 100 million people live in nature-deprived communities. So last year, 10 federal agencies committed to prioritize communities that have been locked out of the benefits of nature that nature provides and ensure all communities can access safe parks, nature, and waterways near where they live, work, and play. Our goal is to cut in half the number of people that do not have access to public parks by 2030. Just last month, President Biden announced more than $1 billion from the Inflation Reduction Act for nearly 400 projects to plant trees and expand access to green spaces in neighborhoods nationwide. These grants will help communities bolster resilience to extreme heat and increase equitable access to green spaces. And importantly, many of these projects will be community designed and community led. And for the scientists and researchers in this room, I know that you will appreciate that we expect to measure our progress. Parallel to the National Climate Assessment conducted every 4 years, a national nature assessment will give us a picture of the health of our natural world as well as how it underpins our economy. We expect the first assessment to be issued in 2026. Finally, CEQ is driving efforts to meet the president's first national conservation goal to protect 30% of the lands and waters by 2030. This is part of the America the Beautiful initiative, which drives collaborative conservation. To date, President Biden has conserved more than 21 million acres of lands and waters and is on track to conserve the most of any president in history. President Biden has taken significant action to deliver on the most ambitious land and water conservation agenda in our nation's history. With new national monument designations, we are protecting Camp Hale in Colorado, Aviquame in Nevada, Kastner Range in Texas, and the sacred sites and lands that surround the Grand Canyon. We have conserved the ancient and vast conifers of the Tongass National Forest, safeguarded the Bristol Bay watershed in Alaska, and restored protections for Bears Ears, Grand Staircase Escalante, and the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts National Monuments. We also have protected the boundary waters in Minnesota and Chaco Canyon in New Mexico. Last month, we announced significant steps to protect the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in Alaska. At the Convention on Biological Diversity in Montreal last year, governments across the globe reached a historic agreement to collectively commit to conserve or protect at least 30% of the global lands and waters by 2030. I share all of this because advancing President Biden's historic climate and environmental justice agenda is bold and requires collective effort. We have made enormous progress together, but we still have work to do. I look forward to sharing our collective progress as we work to build a better future for all. So thank you again for the invitation to be here and enjoy the rest of the conference.